Let's go back to a time when an onslaught of war-torn first-person shooters reigned supreme, and everyone wanted in on Call of Duty's success. It's all we would see for years to come. However, in 2008, there was one game that would defy this, and that game was Mirror's Edge. No, Mirror's Edge wasn't a perfect game, but it was a breath of fresh air that prioritized speed and movement over action and gunplay. It also helped that Mirror's Edge stood out thanks to a striking color palette. The game was much needed for the time, but was overlooked. While Mirror's Edge didn't necessarily end on a major cliffhanger, it was always meant to start a trilogy that didn't end up happening. So for years, those of us passionate waited to hear anything Mirror's Edge related. Finally, at E3 2013, we were given the biggest surprise, a teaser for a brand new Mirror's Edge game. Later released in 2016, Mirror's Edge Catalyst wasn't the true sequel we all wanted, but it was nice to see Mirror's Edge back in some way. Catalyst was a brand new start for the series, a reboot that told the origins of Faith, and EA was really trying to push this return in a big way. We had merchandise, a series of comics, and a television show that never happened. Ultimately, this was a chance for developer DICE to fix many of the issues that plagued the original. For longtime fans, Catalyst is a welcoming return to the formula. Thanks to the controls, it is a very familiar experience. However, since Catalyst is a reboot, it does do a lot differently. The first of this being an open world. Whereas the original was set in the near future in a city familiar to us, Catalyst opts for a more futuristic, technology-driven city. The environment is cleaner, it's smoother, more modern. Even the clothing Faith and everyone else wears reflect this, and in a way, Catalyst reflects the dependence on technology we had back in 2016 and certainly now. With an open world, Faith can travel just about anywhere. Each district stands on its own, not just in design, but the color choices also signify this. However, when the game dives into the story, it has its own levels separate from the open world, so a mix of the old and new. Basically, this open world turns into a collectathon. There's so much to discover that Faith will have to use every skill in her book to collect everything. There's also challenging time trials, and when the servers were online, you could actually create and share your own. One of the highlights in this game are delivery missions. These are odd and end jobs Faith can perform to earn a little extra cash. Runners are important to the city, delivering packages and information that are top secret. So these more basic and grounded missions show exactly how needed runners are when the game's story tends to lean away from this. I will say one of my biggest critiques has to be the runner's vision. Shows the player where they can go, but in this game it doesn't feel as organic. Basically, in this it's a contact lens Faith uses to see these areas. It feels like the game is holding your hand more than the original did. I like that concept of runners seeing rooftops in a way a normal person couldn't. It gave the passion to the art of running itself. So in general, I would say the open world works, but you can also tell DICE was pushed to go in that direction. Games around that time were embracing open worlds and adding replayability to keep that engagement. It works but feels forced, and because of that, the world almost loses that unique charm it should have. Really, Catalyst tries to fix many of the issues from the original, but in this process, it also creates a number of new issues. One of the biggest critiques in Mirror's Edge was the gunplay. You could avoid conflict altogether, you could dive into hand-to-hand combat, or you could pick up a gun and shoot your way through. But because the game is about momentum and speed, Faith does not carry a gun. It only slows her down. Plus, in the heat of the moment, she's not trying to be perfect at shooting. She's just trying to get the job done. And I think a lot of critics miss that point. So in Catalyst, Faith has a personal reason why she doesn't use guns, which means only hand-to-hand combat. I know it wasn't perfect in the original, but in Catalyst it never feels solid. It's clunky. Every time the game forces you to go up against your enemies, it just feels dreadful. And when enemies get more difficult or in large clusters, it's tedious and frustrating. This time though, Faith has new skills to unlock and a few new gadgets. One is a disruptor. It can stop fans so she can slip through, disable cameras, and temporarily stun enemies. Another I know people are mixed on is the Grapple, but it's such an interesting inclusion. It takes Faith to new heights that she could never reach before. It does ruin that flow Mirror's Edge wants to have, but there are some incredible moments that use the Grapple. Which leads us into the story. In Mirror's Edge, the story felt more like an afterthought, a way of stringing together levels. Now in Catalyst, it's more of the focus. It's longer, there's more to it, it goes more in depth, especially on Faith and her past. We also have a bigger cast of characters, and it helps you flesh out the lore of the runners, the city, and its ongoing struggle and corruption. But what I find really interesting is how much Mirror's Edge Catalyst references the original. This isn't a game that rehashes the past or retells the same story, but many of the themes, some plot points, character names, corporations, relationships, it's all here. And as someone who absolutely loved the original, I love connecting those threads. It's like honoring the past while reinventing the future. The relationship between Faith and her sister is still a major focus. Even in Catalyst, both are still on opposing sides of the law. Faith has her father figure / mentor in the form of Noah, who faces tragedy much like Merc. The November riots happened and changed everything. Riding on top of a train and avoiding obstacles, plus that incredible finale at the Shard, it's just one jaw-dropping moment after another. Mirror's Edge Catalyst does a lot differently. The world is expanded, there is a ton to do. Faith isn't the same as she once was, but at the same time, this is a different Faith, one that's more reckless. The game's design isn't as striking as it once was, but it's still refreshing. This is a game that knows its past and where it came from. It's pretty clear Catalyst suffers from a changing gaming landscape and the pressures that came with that to add more and more to it. Catalyst has its issues, but it's still a good game. It's evolved the formula from the original, and that parkour is still top notch, even with some new moves added in. And of course that soundtrack is still as incredible as it was in Mirror's Edge. Just like the original Mirror's Edge, history would repeat itself with Catalyst. What was meant to be the start of a new saga didn't happen. Though unlike the original, Catalyst left a lot of loose plot threads. Most notably, the relationship between Faith and her sister, and how that big finale and revelation will change them and the city going forward. As much as I would love to see Mirror's Edge make another return, I don't see it happening. If EA was interested, we would have already seen a sequel, but EA and DICE are too busy making Battlefield games. It's almost been 10 years since Catalyst was released and the series has been left to rot. But then again, I never expected to see another Mirror's Edge game, and we ended up with Catalyst, so anything is possible. Personally, I find Mirror's Edge Catalyst inferior to the original. However, that doesn't mean Catalyst is a bad game. It has its own flaws, but I thoroughly enjoyed all the times I played it. Even back in 2016, the design and gameplay of Catalyst stood out much like the original did back in 2008. What are your thoughts on Mirror's Edge Catalyst? Do you prefer the original or this reboot? Let us know down in the comments. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell to be notified about future content. If you enjoyed this, take a look at this video on the original Mirror's Edge. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.